Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Ron, and today we are going to be doing another tier list for Deep Rock Galactic. This is a new weapons list talking about all the new secondary weapons as well as all the previous weapons, and we'll be sorting them into categories here. I'm going to be doing these a couple different ways. I'll do it like this first because I think this represents the actual placement of the weapons best. Then I'll be doing a standard list of A, B, C, D without any of the weapons overclocks, and then I will talk about them with overclocks. So it'll be pretty much like 3 lists in one. So our first one is just going to be talking about the categories of general purpose, swarms, single target, and utility. This is all based on my opinion, and if your opinion differs from mine, great, that is awesome. So for these categories, general purpose will be a weapon that works well in pretty much every situation. Swarms will be a weapon that is better towards swarms. Of course, weapons can change with overclocks, they can change a lot. So some of these weapons could move around in categories based on whatever you're building for it. Single target damage is obviously for single targets, something big, hit them really hard. And then utility is anything that doesn't really fit into these other categories as well. So first up, we'll be talking about driller's weapons. We have the flamethrower here, and I would once again put the flamethrower in swarms. The flamethrower is great for dealing with swarms. It does okay in single target damage. It has some utility with its slowdown and with its damage over time. And it is actually a pretty good general purpose weapon as well, but I think it fits best right here into the swarm category. Then we've got the cryo cannon, which the cryo cannon is pretty good. I would put cryo cannon in... I think I'd put it in general purpose. I don't know if I put it in utility before, but I think it's more for general purpose. It also has the ability to freeze things like MacLeod, which is great. If you freeze any of the flying enemies, they'll die instantly. So I think I'd put it up there. Then we've got the sludge pump. I would once again put the sludge pump in utility. It provides a lot of extra value to the team. It still works really well against swarms. It does okay against single targets. I wouldn't quite say it's a general purpose weapon though. The slowdown from it, as well as the damage over time effect, and with the new armor breaking on it, is even better for the sludge pump. I think I'd put it in the utility category just because it kind of fits into most of these roles, but doesn't fit into one in particular. If so, I'd probably put it in swarms out of these 3 here. Up next, we got the Sabata, and I'd probably put the Sabata in general purpose. It doesn't really do enough damage to be single target, although it can do pretty well if you combine it with like the flamethrower, or if you're hitting Mactera, because it does have those synergies where, depending on your mods, it can do a lot of damage there. Some of the overclocks are really good for dealing lots of damage. Some of them are really good for utility, like the trank rounds and stuff. But for the most part, it's a basic pistol that works in most roles, so I think I'd put it up there. EPC is definitely going in utility. It's got so many functions. It can do really high damage to crowds. It can do pretty high damage to single targets. It can apply status effects. You can also use it to mine. So there's just a lot you can do with it. The new wave cooker, I think I would also put into utility because it synergizes so well with the cryo cannon, with the flamethrower. It synergizes pretty decently with the sludge pump as well, especially with overclocks. Without any overclocks, then it synergizes much better with these two, I would say, because it can trigger the thermal shock back and forth. It does have infinite range, so it's potentially even better for hitting things far away than the Sabata is, but I think the place where it really shines is triggering that thermal shock, so I think I'd put it here. If not here, then maybe in the swarms category, because it is really good in combination with these for taking out swarms. Moving on to gunner, we have the minigun. I would say minigun is probably general purpose. It does well against crowds. It does really good against single targets. Maybe I'd actually put it into single target. It does better against single targets than the other 2 weapons usually. That really depends on your positioning and how much you can hit it, but minigun's great. It does have a little bit of a spin up to it, but it does really high damage per second. It's very accurate at very long ranges. It does really well all the way around, I would say, but it still can work as like general purpose or against swarms, but I guess I'd put it more towards single target. It does have that going for it. Autocannon, definitely swarms. It's great against swarms. It just clears up swarms really fast. Overclocks are really solid on the autocannon. It has like nothing but good ones. Same with the flamethrower, really. Both these two in the swarms. But yeah, where this really shines is just clearing up small enemies. It does decently well against big enemies too, so I could see somebody arguing this for a general purpose weapon. Hurricane, I think I will put in general purpose. I think I had these switched around the other way, and you still could. Hurricane's pretty good against single targets. It still has some AoE, so it's good against crowds. It does have very long range, or very long effective range, although it does take time for the rockets to actually get there, so that can be a little bit slow depending on the distance. But I think I'd put it there. Revolver, single target damage. The revolver is great at dealing with single targets, especially far away. It's very accurate, does really high damage. Just all around really good weapon. Burst pistol, I would say, is general purpose. It works well against everything. You can use it against crowds, you can use it against big enemies. It's fairly accurate, fires fairly quick, it reloads fairly quick. All around pretty decent. And then the new coil gun, again, definitely single target damage. Although it does have some AoE to it, especially with overclocks. Without any overclocks, I would say it's more specialized towards single target damage. It can work against swarms because you can have like the concussion blast on it, so it can kill everything in front of it, similar to the double barrel. You can also have some utility with this too, since you can punch through walls with it, which can help save teammates from leeches and stuff. So yeah, I guess it could be argued for any of these besides maybe swarms. I don't think it really is the best for swarms unless you're arguing overclocks. Then we have the Warthog auto shotgun for engineer. Warthog is probably general purpose. It works well against pretty much everything. So long as you're within range, or at least within effective range of the shotgun, it should work just fine against most enemies. Stubby, where would I put Stubby? Stubby I'd probably also put into general purpose. Stubby actually works decently well against most enemies at most ranges. It's not the best at dealing with hordes, and it's not the best at dealing with single targets. It does provide utility with it being able to electrocute enemies. That also provides extra synergies with your secondaries, so that's great, but I think it probably fits best here because I usually just spray Stubby at everything. Then we got the Lock 1 or the Loki. I'd put Loki into single target. It does well against hordes, especially with certain overclocks, but it does give you the longest effective range out of any of the primary weapons engineer has, and you can actually tap fire this at very long ranges and hit pretty accurately. It's not the most accurate, it's not going to beat out like the revolver or the coil gun or anything, but you can put a lot of damage onto one target with this, and the extra range is pretty nice. Then we've got the grenade launcher. Regular grenade launcher is definitely for swarms. It clears up swarms really fast. It's great against most enemies. Can be good at most ranges, so long as you're used to lobbing the shots. And it could be even better based on what your mods are for it, because you could have increased velocity so you don't have to lob them as much. Breach cutter, I think I'm going to put Breach Cutter in general purpose. Breach Cutter just works really well against everything. It clears up swarms really fast. It clears up single targets very fast. It does have some utility with its like damage over time effect if you take Plasma Trail. And it can have like a stun on it, or it can have extra armor breaking, which it doesn't really need, but it could have it. And you can also shoot this through walls, which is pretty nice. There's not a whole lot of other weapons besides like it and the coil gun that can really do that. I don't think there is any actually. Yeah, I think those are the only two. Then we've got the new weapon, Shard Diffractor. Shard Diffractor, I would say, is best used against single target damage. It can build up a lot of damage on one target. You can also build up heat on that target to light it on fire, which makes it pretty good against robots. If you can hit something in the weak spot, you can deal a lot of damage really fast, especially if it's affected by electricity, or if you have like an IFG on there from a scout. It can still work decently well against crowds, though, because it does do a little bit of AoE damage. Well, it does the same AoE damage, at least base, as the direct damage. But it doesn't have a huge area where it's affecting everything from that. Then we move on to scout weapons. The GK2, I'd put GK2 into like general purpose. GK2 is pretty good at dealing with most things. It's got a long range. Actually, it's got really long range. With pretty good accuracy, not too much recoil. It feels like a regular assault rifle, so I think general purpose kind of fits it best. For the M1000, single target damage, you can do a lot with the M1000. It does have its focus mode where you get extra damage on, well, you get extra damage, but you're using extra ammo. Actually hits a really nice breakpoint for clearing up swarms. It's surprisingly good at clearing up swarms, especially if you're running like Hipster or Minimal Clips. Really good for that, but I think where it really shines, at least baseline, is in single target damage. Then we've got the Drac. Drac is definitely best for swarms. You can clear up swarms really fast with the Drac. It does it much quicker than at least the GK2. The M1000 depends on how you build it and how you're shooting. Generally, the Drac will still beat it out just because of the higher rate of fire and that it can clear up small things really fast, especially with some of its overclocks like aggressive venting or the bouncy rounds. I'm forgetting what that's called. Impact deflection, that's the one. That one's really good for clearing up swarms too. So you do have some really good options there with that. Double barrel is... I think I put double barrel into general purpose. The double barrel actually has really long range sometimes. It's surprising how tight the spread can actually be. It can clear up swarms pretty quick, especially at close range, and it can do a lot of damage to single targets. So it kind of works in every place. Same with a lot of its overclocks. So I think I'd put it up there. Zukovs, I would say, are better for single target damage, especially if you have the IFG and if you have the electric rounds on something. You can deal tons of damage per second with the Zukovs, especially including some of their overclocks like the embedded detonators, as well as a lot of their overclocks are just made for more single target damage with the exception of like cryo mines, where that one's generally better for crowds. And then our last weapon here is the crossbow, and the crossbow I'd put into utility. You get the 2 bolt types. So the regular bolts are actually pretty good at dealing with single targets. They're not great against crowds, even though they can one-shot a lot of the normal enemies. The special bolts really help with the utility, though, because you can have pheromone bolts or explosive chemical bolts or the electric bolts. All of those are quite good. The explosive bolts are great for clearing up crowds, especially if you have things like IFGs going or cryo mines going, or cryo grenades going. The pheromone bolts, really good for just taking heat off the team so that the bugs will go and attack something else. Really great for that. And the electric bolts are both good for crowds and for single targets because they can slow things down. It usually synergizes pretty well with its own mods to it, as well as a lot of its overclocks. Alright, so let's go over the weapons once again without any overclocks. So with the flamethrower, you have pretty good damage towards crowds, you have pretty decent damage towards single targets. It's a very easy weapon to pick up and use. Without any overclocks, comparing it to the other weapons, and keep in mind I'm going to be comparing these mostly to the weapons in their own class, not necessarily to one another, because that's not really a fair comparison. Otherwise, something like the minigun is going to completely destroy something like the GK2. So just kind of keep that in mind, as this is for class based. And I did also take out the D tier. I don't think any of the weapons really are D tier. I think the lowest we have is C tier, which in my opinion would just be like average weapons. So with the flamethrower, I would put the flamethrower without any overclocks compared to the other primary weapons. I think I'd put this one up into A tier. The flamethrower is really solid. It does really well against pretty much everything. It'll get you through just about every mission, and it's a very straightforward weapon. Next up, we have the cryo cannon. Cryo cannon's kind of an interesting one too. It's very strong. Freezing anything is really strong. I think I'd put this one also up into A tier. Maybe a little bit above the flamethrower. It's kind of hard to pick between the flamethrower or the cryo cannon. The flamethrower does more damage per second, but the cryo cannon has a better effect than just lighting things on fire usually. That did get changed with the new robots, because the robots are susceptible to fire and they are not susceptible to ice. That being said, you don't necessarily need that against the robots in a lot of the missions, because your drills can still kill the turrets very fast, they can kill the shredders really fast, and your impact axes can kill any of the robots really quick. So I would say that these are about even. Flamethrower is better on the robot missions. The sludge pump I would probably put into B tier. It's still really good. It's probably weaker than these two just because of the synergies that it kind of needs to help out. If you can light the sludge on fire, it's pretty solid, and then I would say it's probably just as good as the flamethrower or the cryo cannon. Which you can do with like the EPC, or of course if you're playing in multiplayer and anybody brings fire, they can light it on fire too. It does slow enemies down. It can slow enemies down a lot. With its new buff where it has armor shred on it base, that is something really good to consider. That being said, I still think it's not as strong as the flamethrower or as strong as the cryo gun, but it's by no means a bad choice. This is like very close to being like the same tier as them, I would say, and I personally like the sludge pump, I think, the best out of these weapons. Up next we have the Sabata, and I would put the Sabata probably in C tier. If I had to pick one of the weakest weapons in the game, I'd probably pick this. That being said, the Sabata doesn't really need to be changed. Maybe some other mods for it, and maybe some more support so that it functions kind of better with these weapons, but I would like to see some more maybe mods or changes to it for it to also synergize well with the cryo cannon and with the sludge pump. It still is one of your best range options. It's still your best option if you want to take Born Ready, because it's the only secondary that needs to reload. And then EPC without any overclocks. EPC, I would put... It's actually a good question where I'd put the EPC. I think I'd put EPC into B tier compared to Driller's other weapons. It has a lot of utility is the thing, and it's kind of hard to quantify how good that is, because you can EPC mine with it, which is good. You can also use it as a pretty decent AoE weapon, a pretty decent single target weapon. Its main downsides are that it can overheat pretty easily. It also takes a lot of time to get used to. It's not a super beginner friendly weapon. If you just want to spam fire it, then sure. But at that point, the Sabata is still probably better than it, because you don't have to worry about the overheat mechanic. So I think I'd put this one here. This one I could see being argued pretty much anywhere. It just really depends on how much you value the extra utility that the EPC gives you, or if you're just looking at it as a straight weapon. Then we have the Wave Cooker, which the Wave Cooker by itself, I'd probably put also into C tier with the Sabata. That's not to say the Wave Cooker is not good. It's actually really good. But by itself, it's not that strong. It does have slowdown. It does have infinite range. Or at least it can have slowdown. And it has infinite range. It's very easy to hit anything from pretty much any distance. It has some really cool mods too. And it does have really good synergies with the primary weapons. So with any of the primary weapons, it becomes a whole lot better. And I could easily see this being argued up into S tier with something like the Cryo Cannon if you're going with a full freeze build and you're using a temp shock build, because that just clears up hordes so fast and just saves you so much ammo that it's kind of insane. Even after temp shock has been not really nerfed but worked properly on this weapon, because before you could freeze and kill a oppressor in like 2 seconds or so. It was really insane that you could kill it that fast. And that wasn't even using like throwing axes or anything. You could get it even faster killed if you use that. Since that's been fixed, it's not as crazy. It's still really strong though, and it's really good against hordes. I would say in combination with like Sticky Flames, Flamethrower, or Full Freeze Cryo Cannon, probably moves up quite a bit. With Sludge Pump, it's still good because the Sludge Pump slows down. This also can be used to slow down. You can also have Neurotoxin on top of that to slow them down even further. You could argue this up too. This one really depends on how your primary is built and how you intend on using it. Just by itself though, I think I'd put it into C tier because it's not as strong by itself. If it's the only thing you have ammo for, then it's going to feel okay, but it's not going to feel way great. Then we have Gunner's Weapons. Minigun I'm just going to put right up into A tier. Minigun's really good. Without Overclocks, it's still really good. It does good damage. It does really good single target damage. If you build it with a fast spin up, it can start shooting really fast. Overall, just a really solid weapon, I would say, for Gunner. And then we have the Autocannon. Autocannon without any Overclocks. I think I'd also put it up into A tier. I don't think it's quite S tier. Maybe. I think yeah, sure, I'll put it up into S tier. It's on the low end of S tier, I'd say. It clears swarms up really fast. It deals with big enemies pretty well too. It can have some good effects, like the tank mod got buffed on it, so you can have damage reduction now if you want to build for a tank gunner. You can also have fear on it, which is really, really good. You usually never run into ammo issues with the autocannon either. The only real issue with the autocannon, well, I guess there's two real issues with the autocannon. One is its accuracy. It's not that accurate at longer ranges. It does suffer from that. You can make up for that with your secondary though, so it's not a huge deal. The other issue with it is its really long reload, which you can also deal with if you take Born Ready, because it has a very long reload. It has, I think, a 5-second reload if you're not reload canceling, which is the same duration as Born Ready, so you can switch between the two. And even without overclocks, it's still really strong. So I think I'd put it on the low end of S tier. I could put Hurricane without overclocks in B tier. It's still really good. I think I'll keep it into B tier right now. But without overclocks, it does well. You can have a heat build with it, which is good. It can have a stun build, which is pretty good. It does good damage. It has long range. I do find myself potentially running through ammo quicker with this than I do with the other gunner primary weapons, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. The gunner primary weapons are very ammo efficient compared to most other classes. Maybe not driller, since that one's up there too, but pretty efficient compared to like engineer or scout. Yeah, I think I'll keep it in B tier, but it's like skirting between B and A tier. It's good. Then we have Revolver. Revolver without overclocks, I'd probably put up into A tier. It's got long range, it's got high damage. There's not a whole lot to say about the Revolver without overclocks. It's just pretty powerful, so I think I'd put it there. Burst Pistol without overclocks, I think I'd put into probably B tier. I don't think it's quite as strong as the Revolver, but it's still good. It still deals with most enemies without any issues. You can still build it for single target damage. You can build it for longer range. It can be potentially more ammo efficient than a revolver, at least without any overclocks and stuff like that. The coil gun, I think I'd also put in a B tier. I don't think it's quite as good as the revolver base. You can build tank with it, which is nice. You can have stuns with it, which is pretty nice. It does provide extra utility since you can punch through walls with it. It does have some extra utility in the tier 5 where you can have like electricity on it, or where you can potentially explode flaming enemies. That can be pretty fun, so I think I'd put it there. Then we move on to Engineer. The shotgun, without any overclock, shotgun, I'd probably put shotgun A tier. Shotgun's good. It's got good ammo, at least if you build for ammo. then it's got good ammo. Turret Whip is really cool with it. Can one-shot a lot of regular enemies without too much trouble. The main downside to the shotgun is its range. Doesn't have the best range, but still it packs quite a punch, so I think I'd put it up into A tier. Stubby without overclocks, I think I'd put into B tier. Stubby's pretty decent. You don't do tons of damage, but you have decent range. You can apply status effects like the electricity. You can deal damage over time. Does synergize pretty well with the secondaries because Stubby does have a lot of ammo, which is great. But Stubby by itself, without any overclocks, is decent. I would say it's just decent. Loki, I think I'd also put into B tier. Sometimes you can run into ammo issues with the Loki. You can kind of run into ammo issues with the Warthog as well. You do have long range with the Loki. Without any overclocks, you do have some other decent things going for the Loki too, since it does do pretty good damage per shot. The lock-on is pretty fast. You can have fear on it. You can potentially have status effects like the electricity on it too, which is good. So, yeah, I think I'd put it to B. I don't know. Engineer's primaries are kind of weird to quantify. Because again, I'm trying not to compare these to like the other classes and stuff. Because again, otherwise something like, oh yeah, the minigun's definitely going to outbeat the Warthog. Like, yeah, but same with like the flamethrower compared to it. That's not really fair to do for those classes. So I think I'd probably put them like this for the class. Then we have Grenade Launcher. Grenade Launcher I'd say is A tier. Grenade Launcher is really solid. You got a lot of damage with it. You got good AoE. You can build it for single targets. You can build it for AoE. You can build it for a lot of ammo. You can build it for fire, which is great. Breach Cutter, yeah, Breach Cutter's just, that's S tier. Like without any overclocks, I think still S tier. It does so much damage. It deals with crowds so well. Deals with single targets so well. Yeah, it doesn't really even need overclocks for it to easily get up into S tier. I'd probably say the Breach Cutter is the best weapon without any overclocks. I think I'd put Shard Diffractor. Yeah, I'd probably put it in A tier. It's crowd control is not as good as the other two. It's not as good as the Grenade Launcher. It's not as good as the Breach Cutter. It's single target damage and its range though. That's going to be where its real strength lies. Because it can do a lot of damage per second. It can build up heat, which is great. That doesn't even need mods for it to build up heat. It can have extra damage on weak spots, extra armor breaking on it. Can do a little bit of AoE damage, but again, that's not really going to matter compared to the other secondary weapons. The single target damage, and especially against like Dreadnoughts, is where the Shard Diffractor really shines, so I think I'd put it there. Without any overclocks, I'd put the GK2 into like B tier. It's fine, it does the job okay. It does reward accuracy, and it does have extra weak spot damage, which is nice. Sort of a small magazine though, and not as much ammo overall, I guess, compared to like the Drac. Potentially even compared to the M1000, depending on how you build it. Even without any overclocks, the M1000 can still be more ammo efficient than the M1000, because it can clear up hordes a little bit faster. So I think I'd put it there. M1000, I would probably put up into A tier. It does well against single targets. It does well against big enemies. It does well at range. You have the option of building it quite a few ways to where you can one-shot headshot normal enemies. You can make it so you can one-shot, focused shot, body shot enemies. That's kind of a weird way to say it. So you have those options going for it, and I think it's pretty solid. The Drac I would also probably put up into A tier. It clears up hordes really fast. It does okay against single targets. The heat buildup is pretty easy to manage, and it does have a lot of ammo. So, and it can also have status effects like the electricity on it, which is nice. I'd probably put Double Barrel up into A tier. Double Barrel's good. You got pretty high damage with it. It does well at close range. It actually can do pretty well at long range too. For some reason, Double Barrel is sometimes really accurate, or at least has a really good spread. And even without overclocks, it can still be quite powerful. Then we've got the Zhukovs. Zhukovs, I'd probably put B tier, I think. I don't know, Zhukovs are kind of weird, because if you build them for single target damage, they can deal a lot of single target damage very quickly. So if you build them with like electric rounds and the IFG, and you're pairing this with like an electric Drac, then you have like a really strong build. You have a really strong setup. But the Zhukovs by themselves, without having all that setup, aren't as strong. They can still do decently well against hordes. They can do pretty well against single targets. So I think I'd put them there. And then we've got the crossbow, which the crossbow, I think I would also probably put into B tier. The crossbow can be really solid. Again, it's more of a balancing act with the crossbow though. It's got good damage per shot, and its special bolts make it so you can build it a ton of different ways, but it does have some limitations because you do kind of have to build around this and kind of know what you're building. So it's not always the most user-friendly, as well as it can take a little while for the bolts to actually get where they're going. At least if you miss, you can pick them up, which is a nice bonus. Alright, so let's talk about each of the weapons now with the overclocks. And I'm going to be considering like their best overclocks as to where I rank them. And kind of just their overclocks overall as to how good they are. Flamethrower with overclocks. The flamethrower doesn't have any bad overclocks. It only has like the worst overclocks are just okay. All the rest are great and has things like sticky flames, which is really good. Fuel stream diffuser got kind of buffed indirectly because of the robots. Does clear up robots really, really well. I think I'd put the flamethrower with overclocks very high up into A tier. I'm not sure if I'd put it quite to S tier. On robot missions, it's S tier. Without a robot mission, it's probably like solid A tier though. Still really good. Sticky flames are really strong. Face melter's really good. Even against like dreadnoughts, which aren't susceptible to fire, something like face melter can still rip through them really fast. Again, I'm going to be comparing these weapons mostly to each other, not necessarily to all weapons against one another, because again, sometimes that would be a little bit unfair, especially against something like the flamethrower that only has like really solid overclocks and some really strong builds with it too. Cryo cannon, I think I would put up into S tier if we're considering the best overclocks. The cryo cannon is kind of in a wonky place in terms of overclocks, because some of them are really, really strong and others not as much. Counting like perfectly tuned cooler, then yeah, this thing's really strong. It clears up crowds really fast. You can freeze things in like half a second. It's insane. Ice Storm is really strong too. You can just clear up crowds insanely quick as well as big targets. And then you have some other ones like Ice Spear, which may not be the best, but it's super fun to use. Then we've got the Sludge Pump, which the Sludge Pump did get buffed, and its overclocks got buffed, which is awesome. I would put this one up into A tier as well with the Sludge Pump, or with the Flamethrower. You have some really good overclocks on the Sludge Pump. You got like the Volatile Impact Mixture, which just melts through crowds and melts through single targets really fast. You got Disperser Compound, which clears up hordes really quick and just spreads out slow everywhere. You got like Goo Bomber, which is super fun to use and can be fairly effective depending on the mission type and where you put it up. Sludge Blast got buffed to where it's actually really strong now. That one was already really strong before, but it came with so many downsides that it normally wasn't worth using. Now that it only has like 2 downsides, it's so much stronger. Yeah, this one's like solid A tier, I would say. The Sabata with overclocks. The Sabata can actually be pretty good with overclocks. I think I'd still put it B tier. It really depends on the overclock and where you're going. A lot of the Sabata's overclocks are not way great or not way flashy. Its clean ones are pretty bad. So the unstable ones are pretty good though. The unstable ones are good and fun. You got like the explosive reload, which is really strong on like escort missions, or if you just want to deal a lot of single target damage. You got trank rounds, which give a ton of utility because you have like a 6-second stun on them. So you have some pretty decent options there with the Sabata. That being said, the Sabata by itself, even with all those, explosive reloads would probably be the strongest, and that's mostly for like single target damage, which it's decent at. The range is still good, but I think I'd probably keep this B tier. With the EPC, this one's, I think I'd put EPC A tier. It is quite a bit better with overclocks, because you can have some good ones like energy rerouting, persistent plasma, heavy hitter. You got some really good options there for any type of build that you want to run with it. It does make the regular builds better. Again, it's kind of hard to determine how useful the EPC is just in terms of utility. So I think A tier is fine for it. This one's like the weirdest one to rank in my opinion. Well, maybe we just got the Wave Cooker right here. Wave Cooker with overclocks is pretty good. I don't think the Wave Cooker really has any bad overclocks. They're all pretty good. I think I'd move this one up to B tier with overclocks. Its best overclock by itself is it's probably the Radiation one. The Radiation one does give you a lot of damage over time as well as slowdown. You can also stack slowdown with the Wave Cooker normally, and you can get a lot of value out of it that way. It works really well with the Sludge Pump if you want to build it that way. It does have some other options like going with full ammo with the Mega Power Supply, and it has like the clean ones, which are really great. Again, the Wave Cooker is going to be most impressive when it's paired with one of these weapons with an overclock that complements it. So I don't know, it can still do decent damage to single targets. It can still do decent damage to hordes by itself. It's just that it pairs so much better with these weapons, and if you're going like full temp shock build again, this one's probably like up into S tier with the cryo cannon in combination, or with the sticky flames. Like those two in combination would also probably be an S tier combo. So I think I'm just gonna keep it B tier. I don't know, Driller is a weird one to decide. All right, then we've got Minigun. Minigun's got a lot of great overclocks. Most of them are pretty good. With overclocks, I would say it's still like an A tier weapon. Maybe with like Lead Storm, it's up into S tier on certain mission types. Bullet Hell is definitely S tier in terms of fun. I think I'd keep it in A tier. It's similar to like the Flamethrower, where it's always going to be really good. Autocannon, yeah, Autocannon's S tier. Autocannon doesn't have any bad overclocks. It's already a really strong weapon. Its overclocks are really, really good. You got like Big Bertha, which can do pretty high single target damage. And if you're building like an AoE secondary weapon, it can be really good. You've got Carpet Bomber, which can be pretty solid against crowds. You got Splintering Shells, which I would say is even better than Carpet Bomber against crowds. And then you have Neurotoxin Payload, which is probably the best against crowds because it has slowdown, it does damage over time. Hurricane, I'd also move the Hurricane up into A tier. It's got some really good overclocks, where you've got like Mine Layer System, which can deal with hordes pretty well and can be good depending on the map type. You've got the Plasma Burster Missiles, where you can one-shot the flying rocks, where you can move them around in any sort of pattern you want and just be hitting enemies super easily in their weak spot because you can just punch right through enemies. You got the Jet Fuel Homebrew, where you just got really high damage per shot. And then you got like the Overtuned Feed Mechanism, where you just got a really good weapon overall. So again, a lot of good overclocks. It does have some that aren't so great. Mine Layer System can be, depending on the mission type. If you get it in like a Mactera Plague, it can be not way great. Same with the Manual Guidance Cutoff, is probably one of the worst overclocks in the game in my opinion. Bulldog Heavy Revolver with overclocks, I'm just going to put this up into S tier. It has some that aren't way great, like its clean one. Chain hit is just not that great, but it does have like volatile bullets where you can do triple damage. You've got elephant rounds where you can deal double damage. You got magic bullets where you have insane amounts of crowd control. You got 6-shooter, which is just pretty much a straight upgrade to the revolver. So yeah, it's just the overclocks really carry it. It's already a solid weapon, and then it gets even better because of its overclocks. Then we got the Burst Pistol, which I'd probably put the Burst Pistol up into A tier too. Burst Pistol has like Lead Spray, where you can do tons of damage, and that's definitely like an S tier on Dreadnought missions. You got Experimental Rounds, which gets you a lot more damage, which is also nice, but doesn't come with the big accuracy penalty like Lead Spray does. You've got like the Compact Mags, which is great too. You can have a lot more utility with it. It's another weapon that has not a whole lot of bad overclocks. Most of them are pretty decent, and it just makes it more solid, so A tier I think is fair. The coil gun with overclocks is pretty good. I think I'd probably also put this one up into A tier. I don't think it's as crazy as like the revolvers overclocks, but it does have some really strong ones. Hellfire is great against crowds. Triple Tech Chamber is really good against single targets and pretty decent against crowds. You've got the Mole, which is really, really high damage against single targets. It can actually even out damage the revolver in that category. You can also technically buff enemies or buff Steve with this too if you have like the Reatomizer one, which is interesting because if you want an elite enemy threat, you can then transfer the elite status to other enemies. So you could get a Steve, fire through the elite enemy and hit your Steve on purpose, so that then Steve becomes an elite Steve, which is very odd. I'm not sure if that's intentional or not. Hopefully it's a feature and not just a bug. Warthog Auto Shotgun with overclocks. Yeah, this one's still like A tier. The Warthog doesn't have any bad overclocks. Unfortunately, it only has 5 of them, but they're all pretty good, besides maybe like Stunner, which I just personally don't like because it's kind of boring. It's not because it's bad or anything. It actually is a pretty good chunk of damage bonus that you get when you're using it, and Stun is a pretty underrated status effect. I just wish it was a little bit more than what it is, but it does have like mini shells, which makes it a great general purpose weapon. You've got the clean one that's like the lightweight cases, which is great. You've got the magnetic pelt alignment, which lets you actually have really long range with the shotgun. So yeah, just all around really solid. Stubby with overclocks is kind of an odd one. You know, I think I'm going to keep Stubby in B tier with overclocks. Some of its overclocks are really good. Turret EM Discharge is fantastic against crowds. It works really well with any of your secondary weapons. Turret Arc can be really strong too on certain mission types, like on Dreadnought missions. Refire Booster is really good overall, and yeah, maybe if you're just I don't know. Because if I'm just counting Refire Booster, it's A tier. If I'm counting everything else, maybe a little bit less. I guess I'll put it up into A tier too. It's still good. I don't know if I would say that it's better or worse than the Warthog. It depends on the situation. Same with a lot of the overclocks. I might not even put anything into C tier now that I'm thinking about it with all the overclocks that we got, because almost every weapon has a good overclock that puts it a little bit higher. Lock 1 or the Loki, probably A tier still. Or I think I put it B tier before, but A tier now. Executioner is really strong. Explosive chemical rounds is really strong. The Lock 1 doesn't have any bad overclocks. They're all really good. Do I put this up into S tier? Yeah, I think I do. It's got nukes, which is really cool and really good against hordes. It's got the hyper propellant, which is really strong against single targets. I think it's still the most single target damage besides maybe the coil gun with Mole, and you make an elaborate cheese maze and shoot something through it. All of its overclocks are actually really good. The clean overclocks are good. Balanced overclocks are really good. There's not really a whole lot to say. All of its overclocks are really strong, and the grenade launcher is already pretty strong. Breach Cutter was already S tier, and it's going to stay up there with overclocks. Some of its overclocks are really strong. The clean ones are really good. Return to Sender can be pretty strong. Spinning Death is super fun. Maybe not the most practical, but it's super fun to watch. So you've got some really cool choices there. Inferno is actually pretty good too. I know a lot of people used to hate on Inferno. It was weaker than it was before. It did get buffed, and then it got buffed indirectly from there just being the robots. So that's even better. Shard Diffractor with overclocks. So far from what I've seen, I wouldn't put it as high as these two, at least most of its overclocks. I think I'd still put it A tier. It's still good. It still has a lot of single target damage. And if you're just talking about like Dreadnought mission with the Overcharger and with like Electric Synergy, then this one's definitely S tier because that can melt through Dreadnoughts super fast. You do have some pretty good options for crowd control too, because you can have like the Magma line. I don't remember exactly what it's called. You can have the one that blows up your platforms, which is pretty funny. I do like that one, and the clean overclock is really good for this too. GK2 with overclocks, I think it's kind of like Bullets of Mercy pushes into A tier, if I'm really being honest, because a lot of its other overclocks are not way great. Its clean overclocks are kind of meh. Let's see, its unstable overclocks, like AI Stability Engine is really cool. I guess AI Stability Engine and like Bullets of Mercy really push it up there. Bullets of Mercy is really strong, especially with everybody running status effects now, and with you being able to run multiple status effects with Scout. M1000 with overclocks. I think this one I would also put up into A tier. Yeah, you have Hipster, which Hipster you could just say alone pushes this up into S tier, which I think would be a perfectly fair statement. Hipster's insane. Minimal Clips is really good. Let's see what else you got. The combat mobility is pretty decent. Electric Shots is actually not too bad, but then you have like Super Cooling Chamber, which kind of drags it down a little bit. I don't know, M1000 is kind of interesting, because if you're just picking like Hipster or like Minimal Clips, then yeah, I can see this one going right up into S tier, and I would completely agree with you 100%. It has so many flexible builds, especially with Hipster. You can build it however you'd like. You can build it spam fire build, you can build it single target damage build, you can build it like a hybrid build, you can build it for crowds, you can build it just for hitting headshots, you can build it for extra stability. There's just so many options just with that one overclock. The Drag 25, probably also A tier. If I'm not pushing the M1000 up into S tier because of some of its overclocks, I'm probably not going to push the Drac up there. Drac does have some really good overclocks though. The impact deflection's great. Aggressive venting's great. You've got Overtuned Particle Accelerator, which lets you deal with practically everything, at least at close range. It's not so great at longer ranges. See, Double Barrel. Double Barrel's also A tier. Overclock's pretty good, besides like Double Trigger or Double Barrel. I don't remember what it's called. The one where you have to fire out both barrels at the same time. That one's not way great. The rest are really good though. And even Shape Shell's got buffed, which is kind of nice. I don't think it needed a buff, but you have like Jumbo Shells, you have Special Powder, which Special Powder you could argue just makes this S tier. Zukovs, I'd probably also put A tier. Yeah, I probably shouldn't even put a C tier here. Let's get rid of that. Yeah, Zukovs A tier. You have some pretty good overclocks. Unfortunately, you only have 5 with the Zukovs right now, too. You don't have 6 or 7 like most other weapons do. But like embedded detonators are really strong. Cryo mindlets are really strong. The crossbow, which the crossbow with overclocks, I would say the crossbow with overclocks is also A tier. You have like the cryo bolts and the fire bolts, which are really good in combination with the pheromone bolts, because you can spread fire, you can spread ice amongst multiple enemies. You can also take like Bodkin bolts, which are really strong. I really like the Bodkin bolts. They're super fun as well. The Trifork Volley can also be really strong if you take it with like the electric bolts and the magnetic shafts, and then you also throw an IFG in there. So you have that real big combination. It can also be used pretty well to clear up crowds, and it can be used in combination with the Fear mod, to where you pretty much have a 100% chance to fear any enemy that you shoot it near, which is great. So I guess this is our list of weapons in Deep Rock in terms of how I would rank them. They're all pretty good. It's really hard to make a tier list for Deep Rock on the weapons, because almost all of them are pretty strong. I've ran through PAS 5 with all of these weapons. in multiplayer and in solo and with most of their overclocks, and found that you can get away with just about everything in this game. So here's the list. You guys have been asking for it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If you didn't, write something in the comments below, like, I wish the list was different or something. Thanks for watching this, and if you made it to the end of the video, awesome. Thank you guys so very much. I really do appreciate it. I hope you guys all have a great day, and special thanks to the supporters of this channel. These are my members over here on YouTube, and my patrons over on Patreon. They get early access to videos like this, and if you would like to be a part of it, you can. There are links down in the description. Thanks everybody who does that. It really helps out the channel a lot, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye!